Hi everyone, please switch your brains to English because our next speaker is coming from University of Zagreb. If I said it correctly, his name is Stanislaw Szklarek, and the topic of his presentation is the balance of great regimes in international politics of 2022, reaction to crisis or crisis of reaction. He's a sociology student, and today he's going to talk about challenges and attributes of democratic and autocratic regimes. Coincidentally and unfortunately, this subject is more important than ever, considering the current events in Europe, not so far from here. So we know that this will be an interesting and useful contribution to that subject. Unfortunately, he joined us virtually, but that doesn't mean that you can't ask questions. Please write them down, and you'll be able to ask them in the end during the discussion part of this presentation. Stanislaw, you may proceed with your do you have a presentation, like a PPT?
Yes, of course. I can share my presentation PowerPoint. Thank you very much for introduction. Am I well hearable?
Second.
It's okay now.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Am I well hearable? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Well? Okay, super. Yes, so I wrote a paper about this title because I was quite interested in recent events that actually had a special pattern in terms of violence, pattern of in international relations. When you have one big superpower country that uses some form of violence towards a weaker one, a smaller one, hypothetically. Yes, in a special cases. So I chose the two cases that already happened recently in that year, 2022, and that cases which can actually put consequences in the future, uncertain future. But certainly these circumstances, these consequences will be visible in the near or further future. So when we entered the year 2022, like we already been the witnesses of some events when actually when we had we could see the forms of violence used by let's say the authority of states. At the beginning of the year, we had protests in Kazakhstan, which began in the 1st of January, that actually were spreading over the country, and they ended up at the end of January. But actually, this reaction of the people that went out to the streets, who were frustrated of the increase of the prices of fuel, they broke up the myth about this perfect president of Nur Sultan, that he was treated as a almost god in Kazakhstan, but now he actually became less popular. I mean, he actually was dismissed. And if I well known, is considerable that the capital of the Kazakhstan, which was recently Astana, and then it was renamed into Nur Sultan to celebrate the name of this president. It's going to already again renamed into Astana. We'll see. Later, yeah, and later we actually we had the most harsh event that actually happened in Europe in recent years. So this was like war outbreak, like in Europe, which is the tension between Ukraine and invasion, and this one is taken into consideration in this lecture. This is one of these two cases that I put into analyze. The second one is maybe less visible, but also important. Is the Single-Lithuanian crisis, caused directly by the opening the representative office of Taiwan. And that was the name of Taiwan was the problem, not Taipei, but Taiwan. So that really frustrated Chinese authorities. That actually, just because symbolic statement, these Chinese authorities decided to put really harsh sanctions. Okay, so I based my analysis on a special theory. I didn't want to analyze basically this whole relations holistically, like considering the whole history of literature, of politics, of different theories of powers, because there are like at least a few major. I chose actually Hannah Arendt's one. Maybe it is one actually not her theory is not as recent as the others, like for example, Betham's theory of legitimization, or Michel Foucault's theory of biopower. But actually, I wanted to just implicate her reflections into this analysis and show up that actually her theses are still accurate. Not all of them, some of them are controversial. She actually, her main work about the politics included in the book called On Violence, Civil Disobedience. This is actually a book which was a response for the events of the year 1968. Like Hannah Arendt was really impressed.
Sorry to interrupt you, but are you turning slides maybe, because we can see them? So if that's the case, just get back to the screen that we can see, and that is the PPT document, and then just scroll through that. Don't do the full screen.
Like that.
It's okay, like doing a full screen air projection, because perhaps you're choosing the wrong window to share screen from.
Like this.
Try picking another window of the screen. Oh.
Or just stay like
or
this.
Just yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Now it's okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. Just put it here. Yes. Yeah, and it's basically she was impressed about the courage of the, let's say, generation in 1968 the younger generation who actually really cared about the global issues in that time, about the poverty, about these distinctions between Western world and Eastern Bloc. And she put her reflections about that. And occasionally she also like described this whole theory, like what is this term of violence, what is the term of power. And yeah, I wanted to also emphasize that Hannah Arendt was a philosopher, and her main points from the major books, the most famous her books, like The Origins of Totalitarianism or Eichmann in Jerusalem, she like described this whole phenomena why German society during the Second World War so easily adopted this violent patterns, actions that were underlined with such a violence. And yeah, she included it with the term banality of evil that very shortly we could explain as a just do your job, follow the orders, not think about what I ordered to you. That were basically the main statements of Eichmann in his process in Israel. Okay, and so let's go over. And Hannah Arendt, like very particularly, distinguished the terms, particular terms, with particular definitions. Because in, for example, colloquial speech, when we have violence, power, force, strength, all of them are used in the same way. But the most these terms that I will talk about are the violence and power. The force and strength underline basically the individual.
I'm sorry to interrupt once again. I really am, but it seems like you haven't managed to go full screen on your presentation. We see your whole application PowerPoint.
You don't see the whole presentation.
We see like you have it open. However, like there's no projection. There's no full screen. So if you could go to Zoom and maybe change a window which you're sharing.
Okay. Wait a second.
Try clicking this on the top left of your PowerPoint window.
Yeah.
Not really, but.
So maybe like this.
It's okay. It's okay. You can just slide like this, like keep it trying to change light, so it's okay. It's like you're following your delivery. Sorry once again. You may proceed.
Okay. I'm not sure what is the main problem. Is it about visibility of presentation? It's not okay. Oh, I see it's visible now. Yes? Okay. And it's okay if it's full screen. Okay. Okay, I will continue. Yeah. These terms of force and strength underline rather these individual factors. The force underlines the force of nature, physical features, and the strength indicates certain property of character belonging to the subjects of or thing. So it's different for each subject. It's like very individual. But the violence and power these terms are more social. This ones can be indicated into politics, and that's why she actually devoted her works to explain the meaning of these two and what is actually the dependency between them. Yeah. These whole reflections about politics, about power and violence were actually these reflections were thrown from her tough theory about actions, about that the actions provoke reactions, and this is what emphasize the construct of society, because when we do actions, we create something from nothing, because we stop the reality and we do the change. Arendt claimed that there is this threat of violent reaction that can be really easily given out of control. So this is one of this thread that actually is not so hard to put violent reactions, because sometimes it can be effective, but as Arendt said, it's just imaginary vision, because basically the main trait of whole actions is that the consequences of reactions are unpredictable, and if the consequences of violent reactions are unpredictable, these consequences will be more harm to the society than the unpredictable reactions to non-violent reactions. Yeah. Moving further, so the main thesis of these reflections about power and violence is that the both of them are inversely proportional towards themselves, and Arendt's main point is that power does not need violence. Violence occurs in situations of absence of power, or its threats, because it is always posed opposite to the disobedient ones. the bigger effort to gain aims, the bigger threat of disobedience, which reflects the more violence is necessary, less power have authorities. Therefore, to protect institution of power, it uses violence. Otherwise, the more institution of power powerful is, necessity of violence decreases. So that ideal power does not need violence. This is like one of the main conclusions pointed by Hannah Arendt. When we like reflect the award of powerful, because powerful commonly can be related with something violent, and for Hannah Arendt, powerful actually is not the definition of violent action. That someone is powerful, it means that is somebody who use violence at all so often. Powerful, basically, it's this term that indicates like the effectiveness of spreading of power, and power has to be legitimist. And one, for example, she put the example of the strategy of Mahatma Gandhi, how successful was his concept of resistance without violence, but how actually powerful it was. So this is what is included in that power does not need violence. And so, as I said, the main factor of violence is that it needs tools. These tools are under the sudden development and can become out of control. This is actually what already Friedrich Engels were writing about, and she actually like noticed like developing military technologies during the war. And this is like this example of sudden development that easily can become out of control. The main trait of violence, which is without a doubt underlined by Arendt, is the importance of distinction, means and aims. Moreover, she warns against the disappearance between these two, where aim is overwhelmed by the necessity of tools. So this distinguish of these two are like vanishing. This boundary is vanishing. It's important to divide them, better understanding how violence works. But it's really easily, and when this boundary, it's very easy to provoke. That means will become overwhelming over aims, and then this boundary can be barely noticeable. Yes. So power is always connected with its legitimacy, but it does not need justification. Legitimacy is based by statements regarding to the past, whereas justification appears when some future speculations emerge. Using violence cannot be legitimized. It can be justified. Nevertheless, justifying violence loses its reliability. at least it's possible to create power under the pressure of violence, because violence does not have capacity of rising legitimization. It can only manage some social behaviors. But also, like, I here noted in presentation that there are like some exceptions, because of course Arendt claimed that society without violence is not actually cannot be a normal society. So he said that the violence can be clearly justified only in the cases when the justification finds like is referred to the past. And she put like this example when, for example, we are attacked and we need to defend ourselves. So we refer the justification to something that already happened. But basically, the justification of violence is referring to something that is going to happen, or is possible to happen. Yeah, and legitimacy is basically referred to abasement in the past. Okay, and afterwards we have terror. So this is like the main threat of the situation when tools have this tendency to overwhelm, to be overwhelming over aims, and then power like is declining to leave space for more violence, and then there appears violence also. Yeah, like these are the consequences of the not stopped violence. This is like the most destructive recreation violence, process of violence. This is what happens where the tools got overwhelming, decreasing the meaning of aims. And total terror, power is barely recognized. Furthermore, this terror is getting tendency to turn against itself. So, like, as she said, as I mentioned before, like when we have a total violence, like the pure violence cannot co-live with power because they are inversely proportional. That's why there's this tendency to against itself. Yeah, and also mentioned that atomization of society helps to spread the true information everywhere, because everyone is a guardian of discipline. And we can notice maybe it could be something more related with Foucault's thinking about panopticon, that everyone is this guy who disciplines the others. But for Arendt, it was the process that only occurs in terror, and for Foucault, it is like a normal thing. That is all. Like, I'm not going to compare Foucault and Arendt. So. What is this uncertainty related? For example, in time of peace, because this threat of of appearing violence for Arendt during the peace is more more horrifying than during the war. And she describes in this book on violent civil disobedience, she describes the main problematic process that brings brings social uncertainty and results with appearance of violence. And it is all about the imaginary pathology, often being not related with accurate science. And it is especially personificated in high-ranked government experts that can push their advice into that what should not be supposed to do. In many reflections of these people, their hypothetical speculations are becoming the facts, imaginary facts that not already happened, that are going to happen potentially in the future, which make afterwards consistently other emotional, not facts. And the worst consequence is resort to violence as a special sort of action to solve a problem, imaginary or not, and cut off the current reality. It is also claimed not only physical violence can destroy bridges of communication and recognition, but also process of isolation and indifference. And also symbolic violence is no less important than physical one. It will occur like this is like this thing that also occurs in nowadays when we hear very often about some theories, about some explanations of some events that could happen or they can happen in the future, and sometimes we can notice some forms of violence related to potential problem. So now we are like, I'm going to go to analyze these two cases to adapt Hannah Arendt's theory. But also I have to mention that in her book, as I said before, she wrote it to answer to the events of 1968, and as I said, she was impressed by this courage of this young generation, but Hannah Arendt was actually one of these persons who often criticized the forms of actions or violence that were adopted by the young protesters. Especially, she criticized the created movement during this time, the movement of Black Power. And she claimed that the problems of the young students in the universities about the, for example, racial discrimination, or about the poverty related with dependency to where you came from, is just the imaginary justification that, for example, for her, the term of third world is just like the idea. Like, she couldn't believe that the people who intend to, that the people who are included in the term of third world have their own identity, and she claims that they cannot form a social group. That's why her opinions became during this time very very controversial. Yeah, but I'm going to implicate this theory into international relations that we have shown between Russia and Ukraine and China this one. And I will try to show up that some of these theses presented before maybe occur properly, or maybe less. So let's begin with Russian invasion of Ukraine 2022, because there is neither such an evident nor brutal case on the war outbreak. The origins of tensions between Ukraine and Russia are like something more than the crisis of two countries. This is something that might be like a clash of two different worlds based on different definition of democracy. The Russian expression devoted to Vladimir Putin's policy is sovereign democracy. It often occurs in researchers' papers because sovereign democracy is a term created by some guy from the Putin's environment who published a book. Basically, this term will be an order perception of democracy, but actually this term is confusing because it does not touch the idea of democracy at all, according to Walker. It primarily concerns Russian foreign policy than domestic affairs. After the Rose Revolution in Georgia and Orange Revolution in Ukraine, the young post-Soviet states put the very first signals of the future eastward expansion of US and European Union influence. The main points of Russia policy, sometimes perceived by researchers, is the protection of nation. Soviet Union merely transported the Russian Empire to the 20th century, and state-building efforts of Russian leaders, such as Putin, are similarly hostage to such predetermined paths. Like Imperial Russia and the Soviet Union both resulted in a similar blend of authoritarianism, underlined by Matsuberidze, militaristic expansion, and defensive paranoia. And as I mentioned, that this tension can be something related with a clash of democracy with this political system. Like in the beginning of the 90s, there was this guy Samuel Huntington, who believed that it was a clash of civilizations. I will just put a little digression about that, and because he believed like this hardest, like the Third World War, will begin in the borders of civilizations, and he also in this work described the first Russian-Ukrainian tension as an endogamous conflict in the one civilization. And according to him, these two nations are more likely to solve the problem in less harsh way, thanks to belonging to the same East Orthodox civilization. Because for Huntington, like the main thing of belonging into one civilization was the religion. The religion is something that describes like the society and belonging, one civilization. And but yeah, and we'll continue. Indeed, in the beginning of the 90s, the conflict ended up without bigger violence. It was the case of affiliation of Crimea and also Ukraine heritage, Ukraine like heritage from Soviet Union, like Black Sea, like sort of Black Sea fleet, and some atomic power stations. And for Russia, it was not for justice. Yeah, and Huntington's thesis obviously questionable, because afterwards we have seen the events of 2008 war in Georgia and 2014 annexion of Crimea. Either Huntington did not predict exacerbating Russian policy towards post-Soviet states or the present Russian violence. It's just the introduction of greater violence that will take place at frontiers of civilizations. I'm sorry for 1 second. I have to just open one door. Yes, so to put a commentary towards Huntington, like even if the world is divided into some civilizations, maybe it's not based on like this common definition of religion. Maybe this religion is changing because like afterwards, after this work, Huntington described, he wrote another book, The Third Wave of Democratization, and he underlined that many countries after Eastern Bloc collapse became democratic states. I mean, they tried to be democratic. So like the term of belonging of this civilization maybe is changeable with the time. Maybe this term of religion is not like the term of the church affiliation. Like we also know that in the modern studies of religion, in sociology of religion, these patterns of being religious, of religion, is not only something to be affiliated to a church. Maybe also it could be something relating to belong to, for example, political system. Yeah, like but okay, like this was like a digression about Huntington's theory. I evoked him because he like mentioned this tension of between Ukraine and Russian. He said it was predictable that it's not going that the war is not going to outbreak, but actually that what happened nowadays is something different. So the culture of violence in Russian political life increased significantly with Putin's deliberate tolerance, which has become his major contribution, according to Walker. The present political system carries the features of terror, and according to Arendt, terror reveals when the means of violence are becoming overwhelming than political aims. The horrifying situation of opposition and human rights activists is as terrifying as the propaganda which becomes a law. Like recently, for example, talking about invasion. A word invasion can provoke to stop you by police and prosecuted you for 15 years. For 15 years of prison. Arendt says that total terror has a tendency to turn against itself. Thus, the question is if Russian society experienced genuinely this terror, or is it not so total, and we just provoke our own imagination that it's so horrible? Apart from domestic politics, a great autocratic country that Russia is, obviously, develops its means of violence in international relations. The subheading of this paper reads reaction to a crisis or crisis of reaction. This is a question about the meaning of power in international relations between a global superpower and smaller state. And the war in Ukraine is justifying by disobedience and some symbolic statements that Ukraine is not going to affirm Russian movements toward Crimea and Donbass. Like, Ukraine never affirmed after the annexion of Crimea, never affirmed this Russians statements, Russian annexion and annexions of Crimea and Russians' interest towards Donbass territory. We can assume that since the Maidan revolution in 2013, threat of losing international power has reformed into accurate means of action to stop the currently progressive reality. The reality is that the border of NATO and European Union have eastward expanded since the collapse of Soviet Union. And more post-Soviet states declare willingness of Western Commonwealth membership, like Ukraine and Georgia. The defensive paranoia I mentioned before sees the reality as a threat of power. The less power, the more violence is visible. Ukraine's recent connection with Western countries have put itself towards engaging European integration. Despite the Donbass conflict since 2014, the threat of full-scale war was dissuading from possibility. And at the end, it was just at the end of 2021 when the information emerged about potential Russian attacks. Nevertheless, the diplomatic solutions were believed as final ones. For this reason, one can say the war outbreak happened suddenly. As the information we are provided, the tools of violence during the Russian attack have already crossed the line of legality. At least more visible are the images of violence than the images of aims. Because we also experienced these references, the informations about suffering citizens, about moving refugees, about public infrastructure and housing all bombed. We can presume, we can conclude that in the term of this war, violence already overwhelmed the aims. At least the images of violence are more common than images of aims. And to illustrate this justifying Hannah Arendt system, like the best describing example, that's what happened in Mariupol. That's what happened in the Turkey when Sergei Lavrov tried to justify the bombing of maternity hospital in Mariupol. Sergei Lavrov is a minister of foreign affairs of Russia. And he said that he justified this bombing by the presence of one radical battalion that kicked out all personnel some particular battalion. Thus, the hypothesis justified violence gain less effectiveness seems to be noticeable in this example. So, like when you have this thesis created by Arendt, we can look for some examples that maybe are not implicatable from Arendt's theory. But that's what is interesting is that we are maybe shocked that this kind of justification appears and based and that it occurs during the war. But according to Hannah Arendt, it is actually nothing surprising that it occurred in the past, and it occurs now, and it will occur in the future. According to her, like any kind of justification makes violence less effective.
Please read.
Yes.
Try to wrap it up in 2 minutes so that we can have time for discussion as well. So just keep that in mind, please.
To give what?
To wrap it up a little bit in a few minutes so that we can have a discussion later.
Oh my God! Yes. Okay, I will do it faster. So for better understand, hence, like the answer for the question, if more emphasize this crisis of reaction when we talk about the global north reacted by imposing sanctions about decreasing meaning of Russia is a term of democracy, or reaction to a crisis when we talk about Russian reaction to its own issue of losing allies in Eastern Europe, is still open. The future will show following consequences. In both cases, a crisis is a Russian problem, the problem of instability of power. Okay, very roughly, I'll try to describe the Lithuanian crisis. The Baltic state is taking an active role in promoting fundamental human rights values and addressing injustice in both regional and global affairs in recent foreign policy. In regional zone, it is significantly perceived in Eastern European politics. Main politicians of opposition from Belarus and Russia found a refuge in Lithuania after their exile, like Svetlana Tiwanowskaya or Leonid Volkov. Lithuania, as a member of European Union, is constantly expressing the position to back down from Russia, which continuously infringes upon international human rights. Estonia's former president stated that Lithuania has picked up the ball for the rest of the region. For example, the similar voice of Poland, let's say, about the Eastern policy is eroded because of its own government not meeting democratic standards, while Lithuania gets a lot of positive exposure. Hypothetically, in global zone of human rights affairs, the small Baltic state has not been shy enough to call out injustice. This meaningfully noticed in recent years when Lithuania has emphasized the Chinese ethnical and political crimes in official statements. Lithuania, the first important action of Lithuanian government was leaving the China-led project called 17+1, which is the cooperating with Central and Eastern European countries, often criticized for being China's gateway to Europe. And the next step happened in July 2021 when a Baltic state announced the establishment of a Taiwanese representative office in Vilnius, which is quite against one China policy, being the commonly accepted so far. Despite the declaration of European Union Commission President that the issue does not constitute a very breadth one China policy, Beijing downgraded relations with Vilnius to the charge d'affaires level and ordered all Lithuanian diplomats in China to turn in their diplomatic identification. Furthermore, Chinese authorities decided to reduce economic ties with Lithuania very harshly, which is visible felt by the European country. In January 2022, European Union raised a complaint against China with the World Trade Organization, calling its action against Lithuania illegal and discriminatory, but has otherwise largely left one of its smallest and weakest members, Lithuania, to fend for itself. I just noticed that the opening of representative office is not the same as recognition of Taiwan. It was just a smaller step, like to emphasize the issue of Taiwan. The case of Sino-Lithuanian current issue is indeed too fresh to put any anticipation. And this is not what this paper is going to discuss about. However, some past and present actions deserve attention to analyze. That's what we come across studying this case are particular forms of violence in international relations. That what has happened is the result of disobedience to the One China policy. Taiwan has been struggling since the consensus of 1992, whereas the official recognition of Taiwan, Republic of China, is coming with economical and diplomatic withdrawal of Beijing. This is the main reason why Taiwan is recognized just by a bunch of not meaningful countries in global international relations and economical fluency. The most important for Taiwan are allies in the Central America, like Honduras, for example, and Nicaragua. Nicaragua actually is going to switch relation into China. In fact, Taiwan developed an impressive system of unofficial partnerships with other countries, including USA, European Union countries, and even China. We would rather assume that the main conflict of the Sino-Lithuanian crisis is caused by symbolic statements. Hence, how politics of the issue can be perceived by Hannah Arendt's theory of action and who resorted to violence and why. First of all, it will be easier to analyze if we indicate the means and tools which are important to comprehend political violence. Assuming maintenance of the consensus 1992, Chinese interests over Taiwan are not particularly endangered. So that is the aim of Chinese policy, to maintain status quo. That's why the case of Lithuania is so important, that not only Taiwan, but also European countries got involved in, but not entirely. The main Arendt's hypothesis says the more power one gains, the less violence characterizes that. It seems to be clear to see. We observe a global superpower whose authority is violated by a small European Baltic state. Lithuania is a member of European Union and NATO, which posits it in completely different situation than the recognition of Taiwan by the other states, because these other states does not belong to the Western world, the global North. Lithuania actually did not announce the recognition of Taiwan, as I mentioned before. So opening of the representative office is even smaller step. Nevertheless, the reaction of China formed a harsh response as I mentioned before. It can show the weakness of power or threat, the fear of losing even more power with other cooperating countries. The best illustration are emerging warnings towards other states, explaining the potential consequences of disobedience. Except Lithuania, Slovenia was going to open another Taiwan representative office, until when China responded by saying it was deeply shocked and warned Slovenia authorities that it was taking a dangerous road. Then Slovenia clarified to use name Taipei instead Taiwan. The Sino-Lithuanian conflict turns out an illustration saying what is happening when a state just changes this symbolic but also meaningful name from Taipei into Taiwan. Arendt say that the violence does not have capacity of rising legitimization. On the other hand, we notice that economic connections with China can bring lots of attractive goods even for the smaller states. Recently, after the new presidential elections in Nicaragua, the government switched diplomatic ties to Beijing in December. Yes, I'm going to finish 2 minutes. And so the weakness of Chinese power can be just apparent. But is it already a proof for bigger legitimacy? According to Arendt, all tools of violence can be justified. Any danger of maintenance of consensus of 1992 is the justification, which always make violence less reliable, as Arendt would say. Yes, so just conclude that we can anticipate how actually uncertain in how uncertain situation Lithuania created. That actually it's the first like democratic state from Western world who actually strictly follow the China policy, but also like I read some exit polls that Lithuanian society doesn't support this policy at all. So it's quite questionable how it will be visible in the near future. Yeah, so I will just finish with this main conclusion. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'm really sorry for not paying attention to the to time. And if you have any questions, I will receive it.
Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for this interesting presentation. It's okay, we're still in time, but we can see that you're passionate about this topic, and that's actually great. So no need to apologize for that. It's amazing that you mentioned Hannah Arendt so much, because mostly her work and contribution to this topic is mostly unrecognized. So by doing so, by doing this presentation, you actually gave space to acknowledge her achievements and her contributions to this part of sociology and political sciences and all that. I'm wondering, since Max Weber says that the state only exists because it has a monopoly on the force, on the brute force, on violence, is it possible to create a society, a state that doesn't have violence at its core? Is it possible to regulate society without such horrible means that you can see in these last few months?
Yes. So this is like this case about how we define the violence. Also, like Hannah Arendt, like she approved that there is some institutional forms of violence that are necessary to put discipline into people who intend one institution. She like just claimed that the violence is not a pure expression of power. So I think like she just like encouraged people to to follow the actions that can change the reality. I maybe could say maybe to look for different forms of actions that maybe can contribute something new, some comments, some also critics to change the reality, and that these actions that maybe are not the violence. And but if we talk about like the social structure and the passion of power, I think if we, for example, as you mentioned, Max Weber's his model of power, I think in that way how it is developing. When we, for example, notice in the communicative model of Habermas, it is like this power is happening in the field of communication, for example, in the language field, and I think this is something that the society should follow, to like clash these different subjects of power in a not fields of violence, but the fields of communication, healthy communication.
Thank you. And do we have any questions from the audience, maybe? Well, then I have another one for you. You mentioned symbolic violence. Can you quickly maybe mention some examples of symbolic violence that we can see in these violent encounters that are happening in Europe right now?
Yes. In the field of international relations, symbolic violence, is maybe this is a good question. Like to look for a symbolic violence that does not provoke any, for example, sanctions. Maybe it is more about these statements, this politics of statements that we had in the case of Lithuania, Lithuania crisis, actually. When we had Lithuania who enacted this term about that it arises the problem of injustice in China, but it's not actually the term of violence at all. It is more visible like in domestic problems when, for example, in the language field. So when somebody is using like the hate or putting like cultural signs into for example, very difficult history. Like, for example, somebody would say, what a bad Jew, or it will be like this maybe form of symbolic violence in this, actually, in the communication field. Yeah. But this is a good question.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation, and we wish you all the luck in finishing your studies, and we hope that we'll see you again on some other conference or something else in our organization.
Thank you very much for accepting my paper.
Have a nice day.